Hey, so welcome to part 2 of this vlog. I'm going to be continuing to develop this desert scene that we started yesterday. But first, we're going to do a quick recap of where we left off from the last video. So last time we talked about having this terrain set up through the landscape editor in Blender. And then we also brought in a scanned canyon piece from Megascans. And we have a couple box cutters that are booleaning some gaps, some doorways through the canyon piece that we have. And I also started to bring in a few more of these scanned rocks so we can kind of dress the terrain around a little bit. And as you can see here, we also have a simple sun. Just to kind of, give us a little bit of lighting, just so we can see what we're doing, and kind of give us like an early vibe as to what we want this scene to be. I'm thinking pretty much like a hot desert kind of lighting, very dry, kind of high noon kind of feel is what I think I'm going to be going for. But yeah, so now we have this landscape set up. I'm quite happy with the early composition that we have. Again, we can like tinker this for like 100 years if we want to, but yeah, at this point I think it's pretty good for us to kind of commit towards and keep going. And as far as camera angles, it's really something that I want to, like, I usually kind of decide which camera angle I'm going to be working with pretty early on. So I haven't set up my cameras yet, but I'm thinking that for the most part it's going to be somewhere around here. So kind of like having the doorways kind of in the thirds of the screen, kind of following the rule thirds. That's going to be sort of my main kind of favorite kind of camera angle for this scene. But at the same time, I don't want to kind of commit to that too hard and kind of neglect other potential angles that might also be cool. So while I'm really liking this view right now, and I probably will continue with this just because I'm feeling pretty good about it, I don't want to kind of just jump the gun and say that that's going to be the only camera angle that I'm going to be working with. I might do something like this as well in addition. So I want to kind of keep this in mind. I don't want to dismiss anything too early. So even if I do end up with one camera angle, I think it's also good to kind of keep my mind open and just have a couple camera angles in mind. Maybe even like a third shot, like maybe an aerial shot or something like that, which I did from my last piece. So yeah, I'll be setting up the cameras later, but for the most part, I'm really liking this kind of view. So this is going to be sort of my primary kind of viewpoint and kind of work things out from here for the most part. So kind of going back to the landscape a little bit. So now that we have this sort of procedurally generated through the landscape tool, I kind of want to go in now, knowing again that this is the angle that I want to play with. I kind of want to use what we have here, but also kind of tailor the scene a little bit more so that everything kind of fits with each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and then I'm going to go to the sculpting tab, and I'm gonna kind of sculpt it a little bit manually, just so that this bump right here isn't like interfering with the doorway. So I'm gonna take the this draw brush, and I'm gonna hold Control, so that we get an inverted brush to kind of sink that down so that we're not blocking the way, and so that we can get full visibility of this door here. And then I'm going to switch over to the flatten brush here. Kind of flatten it out a little bit so that it's not super goopy. So yeah, I think something like that is not bad. I'm probably going to go back to it at some point and do another iteration. But at this point, I just really wanted to make sure that this bump here wasn't blocking the focal point of the piece, right? Like the whole point of this is to kind of show the man-made kind of structure that was built within the natural rock here. So now that's out of the way, I'm going to move on to something else. So in the last video, we talked about having, you know, the main focus being this really noisy, crunchy rock, and then having like kind of that up against like this really smooth terrain, and then kind of going back into this like smooth, really sharp man-made doorway, right? And that's definitely something that we want to play with and kind of emphasize. But at the same time, it doesn't hurt to kind of add a few noisy bits on the terrain, as long as it doesn't take away from the main focal point of this big giant rock here. So what I'm going to be doing is going to be adding, you know, bits of these jagged rocks kind of along the way. And just looking at some of the reference here. So if you take a look of like where all the jagged pieces are, they kind of like, you know, like this area is kind of smooth. Switch that to something more visible. You know, you get like some nice soft sand here, and then wherever the ground kind of rises up is kind of where all the jagged pieces are, right? So it's like smooth, 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 and then you kind of get this jagged piece, kind of like a cherry on top of the ice cream, right? Where it's like smooth, 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 and then where it's elevated is kind of where you get the rock. So that's sort of something that we want to do with our scene here. So same thing here, right? For the most part, it's like super smooth sand, and then wherever it's elevated is kind of where you get the rocks pointing out, and that's where the noise, the crunchiness is, right? So we want to do something somewhat similar to that. So I'm going to be taking these, kind of just placing them all around, rotating them. Kind of placing them where the elevated bits are. Same thing up here. So right now I'm using the same terrain piece. Probably going to be using another one just to vary it up a little bit more. But I like to get as much mileage as I can with as few assets as possible, and kind of add more when the mileage kind of runs out, right? Like I don't want to be adding like 10 different things right away. I kind of want to make sure that I'm stretching as much as possible, as few pieces as I can. And I think that really plays a lot with like the cohesion and the cleanliness of the scene. Because if I start adding like a 10, like, you know, 10 of these scans right away before even seeing them in Blender, then it's going to be a mess and it's going to be too much to choose from. So I kind of want to limit myself and stay disciplined, and you know, make sure that whatever I bring into the scene is useful, if that makes sense. I don't want to get too carried away with too many things available at my fingertips, because that can get really overwhelming, and as I said, it'll create a very messy scene. So right now that feels really good, you know, having that piece sit right on top of the mound there. And I'm not shy about like scaling things up, especially if it's far down the line. You know, as long as it's within reason, you know, scaling is something that I don't have an issue with, especially when it comes to organic assets, because, you know, organic assets are quite forgiving in a sense that, especially with rocks, right? Like, it's kind of hard to tell how big they are. Maybe with like trees and leaves like that, it might be a little bit more noticeable when you scale them up, just because, you know, leaves and branches are like super recognizable things. And if you see like a leaf that's like super huge, then your brain's gonna kind of call it out. Whereas rocks, I think, are a little bit more forgiving. Man-made things are definitely not forgiving, right? Like if you scale up a set of stairs or something like that, it's gonna look off. But with rocks, you can get away with a lot. So something like that. So one of the things that's already kind of bothering me with this duplication here is that, like, the peak, see those peaks, it's like kind of the same, right? And to me, that's like quite recognizable. So at some point, this is probably something I'm going to want to replace with something else, or like add something on top of it so that it's not so obviously the same thing as this thing here, right? So yeah, I'm gonna keep doing that throughout the scene. Again, I don't want to take away from this giant canyon piece here, just because this is a sort of the star of the show, right? And these other pieces here are just kind of supporting pieces, just to kind of frame the focal point and kind of add some texture to the scene. As well, I want to note that, like, you know, as I said, this is going to be my main kind of perspective here. This is going to be where my camera is going to be sitting. Also probably around here. So knowing that, I'm already like not zooming in. I'm already like not editing it like really close to here, just because I know that it's not going to be a perspective I'm going to be seeing anything from. So I'm already kind of editing things from the perspective that I know I like, if that makes sense. So now that we have this supporting piece here, and as I said, this is kind of already bugging me, the point that there's like these peaks here that are quite similar looking. So I'm gonna bring in another scanned asset here. Kind of just bring it up here, scale it up. Actually just replace it. Yeah, and that's already way better. Let me actually see if I went ahead and replaced that other one as well. So kind of liking that a lot better actually. Give it a rotate. Nudge it a little bit. Give it a scale. And yeah, I think this rock piece here is a lot more forgiving than the other one just because it doesn't have, it has fewer recognizable features, right? It's a lot more generic looking than this one here just because this one has that peak. So yeah, that's working pretty well. I'm going to be placing a few more. Let's see what it would look like down here to kind of just butt up against this main piece here. Pretty good, not bad. So eventually what I want to do too is like have kind of scattered kind of rocks kind of fallen off here as well, right? Because that is what actually would happen in real life. To kind of just show you as well like where I'm getting these from, right? So again, I have my Megascans Fab library here, and you know there's a ton to choose from, so I'm just kind of choosing the ones that I feel will fit in the scene. And you know, as you can see, there's a bunch of different colors and textures, different materials, and I'm not super worried about it. I'm not sweating it too much at this point, just because in Blender there is the shading, a lot of shading nodes that we can play with to kind of unify everything anyway. So I'm not super worried about the different albedo colors and all that kind of stuff, just because at some point we can unify them using the shading editor. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to be placing a lot more of these around. Let's place a few more over here. Let's actually add the normal map here, just so we get some of that crunchy detail. There we go. So yeah, so you know, like this piece and this piece come from different parts of the world in terms of where they're scanned. But again, now that we have the normal map back on for both of them, you can tell already that they're gonna fit in just fine, as long as the albedo and the colors are tuned at some point, right? It's not gonna look way off. So I wanted to talk about the references a bit more as well. So yesterday, or in the last video, we're talking about this particular photo here, where we have this giant piece of rock in the middle of the desert somewhere, and somebody, some genius out there, decided that they wanted to make a building out of it and carved these nice facades and made some doorways into them, which is what compelled me to create this piece to begin with. And so I decided to kind of branch out a little bit more and find other examples of structures like such This one, I believe, is the famous one in Jordan called Petra. While these are cool, structurally, I think there's a lot that we can take away from it. These pillars, these broken pillars in particular, with the blocks hanging out of them, I think are really cool details. But as a whole, I think this one especially is a little bit too noisy. There's too much going on. There's too much, there's just too much noise that's going on. There's just too many archways, and the rock itself is quite busy, and it's not really a look that I want to go for. That said, I think there are still some elements in here that I think would be really cool to bring forward. Now this one here, I don't know exactly where this photo came from, but I really like how clean it looks in terms of the structure itself is quite clear. You know, there's not a ton going on, but there's something really appealing about it, in my opinion. But what I really like about it is the material differences, right? So what I mean by that is, you know, you have this nice white sand at the very base. You get like little accents of the green from the dying foliage, and then you start to kind of creep up into this gradient of red as you get into the actual structure. And then at the very top, you get this nice blackened rock to kind of cap everything off with, which I think is super, super cool, super appealing. So I think this particular photograph is something that I'm going to take inspiration from in terms of just how clean it looks and the material variation and how cleanly separated the material categories are. So this one I'm really liking, and I think it's going to be one of the main references moving forward. I also wanted to talk about reference organization. So at this early stage, I'm just throwing photos that I find from Pinterest into this board. So I'm not like super organized with it yet. I'm just really throwing in whatever photo that I come across with that I find really interesting and appealing, and I think will fit the direction of the scene. I want to be a little bit loose right now, so as you can see, not everything is super organized. But then as I kind of come across more references as we go through the process, eventually I'm going to start categorizing them and putting them into different areas. So for example, I'm going to have a section for composition, I'm going to have one for lighting, I'm going to have one for materials and so forth, even a section for rendering style, in which I'll take examples from other artists and take inspiration from the way that they've rendered their art. So eventually, as we solidify the process, the scene, the references will also start to kind of get funneled into more clean categories. But for now, at this early stage, I don't want to restrict myself by, you know, super organizing everything and making things super rigid and prescriptive, right? At this point, it's still very early exploration stage, and I don't want to create like barriers between different elements at this point. I just want to come across things and keep building things and really let the sort of the art muse tell us what to do with it. So I'm going to end the video right here, and yeah, we'll catch you in the next one.